Hello there.
The cinema courtroom is now in session.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome back to the Cinema Courtroom, a podcast where your favorite blockbusters await trial with your host and galactic judge, Muckram Mark. Do not forget to like and subscribe on whatever streaming platform that you're listening to, whether it be Spotify, SoundCloud, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel, because every click on the icon counts. Don't forget to ring the notification bell and share this podcast with your friends, family, cat, dog, pigeon, whomever. And guys, do you really think that I wasn't going to come back with the milk? Ladies and gentlemen of the esteemed jury, I've been away for a whole ass month. So you know what? Not only am I going to deliver you the milk that I promised, I'm going to cover not one, but two movies in this episode of the Cinema Courtroom, starting with our first review topic, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which is going to be split into two dimensions, the non-spoiler dimension and the spoiler-infested dimension. And then our second review topic will be American Psycho immediately after Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness spoiler and non-spoiler discussion. Now, without further ado, let us begin with Doctor Strange.
Things just got out of hand.
A few weeks back, I watched Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness on IMAX. Now, IMAX is a proper format for every movie-going experience, by the way. Crispy sound, widened resolution, expanded visuals, big screen, and also some of the scenes are shot with IMAX cameras. We've seen this with Marvel's Avengers Endgame and Infinity War. It was shot, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was shot in its entirety with IMAX cameras. Needless to say, IMAX is the gold standard for filmmaking, because Endgame went ahead to exceed $1 billion, including its re-release. And I would really recommend for everyone to see a Marvel movie or any blockbuster movie in that IMAX format. And I'm not getting sponsored for this, by the way. I genuinely adore IMAX purely because I regret not watching Christopher Nolan's Interstellar in IMAX. I digress to say that I watched every major blockbuster on IMAX the first chance I got. Now, I want to share my thoughts on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But first, before I do that, I just want to remind you guys, like I did in the intro, I have split this review up into two dimensions, a non-spoiler dimension and a spoiler-infested dimension. So, in case you haven't watched the movie yet, I encourage you to tune into our discussion, and then you can navigate using the timestamps on YouTube to skip past the spoiler discussion to the next one. Now, first things first, I'm going to tell you my thoughts on Doctor Strange overall, and that is that I think Doctor Strange is quite exceptional. But there's no way in hell I would call it a horror film, with the exception of certain scenes that involved a certain character. What I genuinely liked about this Doctor Strange sequel was that it did what a sequel must always do above all else. Expand on the character of interest. Don't repeat the same formula. Don't go back and forth. Expand on Doctor Strange. And you know what? Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness expanded on Stephen Strange's origin story to a really effective degree. Another thing that I would like to add is that Doctor Strange was really action-packed from the start of the movie to the final act of the movie. filled with some cameos, and they introduced a new character into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, America Chavez, who has the unique ability to teleport across the multiverse. Now, Chavez's story arc, I'm gonna say, is bloody brilliant. At first, I expected her to be this cocky, know-it-all, figure-it-all person who knew how to do their job better than Strange, a well-seasoned sorcerer who has been trained in the course of at least 5 years, but surprisingly enough, that wasn't the case with America Chavez at all. She had a clearly defined role. And on top of that, she was a 15-year-old character that was actually played by a 15-year-old actress for a change. Another element that I appreciated about this movie was the editing. Sam Raimi's editing in the Doctor Strange sequel was exotic and somewhat unexpected if you are just into how the film is edited like I am. Because let me just tell you, I have this problem with watching movies where I am distracted by the editing and not the actual visuals adapted from the screenplay. So, for me, personally, to see Doctor Strange try that one particular transition to the next scene was just brilliant. As of which transition it is, without giving the scene away until we talk spoilers, which is very soon, it's essentially like a black screen and then it turns into this circle to show what's going on in the other side of the multiverse. It's not easy to describe it because you're going to have to watch that movie to get the gist of what I'm talking about. And by the way, let me tell you that just as I wouldn't call this movie a horror film, I wouldn't necessarily call it a go-to movie for connoisseurs of the multiverse. In fact, I usually leave this at the outro of the podcast, but Friday's episode of the Cinema Courtroom show will be reviewing Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's a movie for multiverse connoisseurs like myself. In fact, part of the reason I watched that particular movie was because I've seen Multiverse of Madness, and I felt like something was missing. And Everything Everywhere All at Once gave me, and it delivered the multiverse aspects that I was missing. Again, I'm talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once this week on this Friday show, so stay tuned for that. Now, it is time to finally enter the long-awaited dimension, the spoiler dimension, where we're going to meet Tom Holland as a spoiler variant, because he's like the embodiment of all spoilers. But look, overall, I was entertained by Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and I believe it is underrated. I'm going to talk about a few scenes that are just on the top of my head now, after I've seen it the second time, I think I was able to, organize my thoughts on Wanda's brutal execution of the Illuminati, who had brief cameos in the movie. Black Bolt, Reed Richards, Captain Carter, played by the talented actress Hayley Stillwell, Charles Xavier, played by Patrick Stewart, and a variant of Mordo. It almost sounds like when you mention Mordo, all you need is to accidentally include that R. You know what I'm talking about. From Lord of the Rings. But, I think it made sense that Wanda would execute the Illuminati, considering that, especially with Professor X, Jean Grey fried his ass. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. Jean Grey kicked everyone's ass in the X-Men. Are you telling me that Wanda, who's arguably the most strongest Nexus being on the planet, nay, the entire universe, isn't going to be able to stand a chance against Charles Xavier, much less kill him and snap his neck? And don't forget, I believe Professor X stood his ground for a good few seconds. I think he was able to, navigate the consciousness without getting fried to shimerines. just yet. In fact, I believe it wasn't Charles Xavier's primary concern for him to eliminate the Wanda threat. Rather, he wanted to help Wanda. But obviously we know that is one of Professor X's few weaknesses, which is, he cares about, he emphasizes with villains. And as we've seen with Magneto in the X-Men trilogies, he doesn't really want to kill him, because we know this, considering that at the end of X-Men 1, why else do you think Magneto is just confined to a cell and not executed, Because that's not who Professor X is. The same of Wanda. He thinks that there is some good in Wanda, and therefore he thinks that, metaphorically, because, from the way I see it, this whole sequence where he enters Wanda's mind was pretty much of a metaphor, because he said something along the lines of, "You're still in there, Wanda," and part of that does ring true. Wanda is not a bad, and at first at least, and even while her intentions are well meant, she isn't necessarily a mustache twirling villain. I think she has some depth. I think she, is empathizable, because we've seen her in Infinity War having to kill Vision, and yet they've still lost anyway. So I think Professor X was, I don't know, I suppose he could sense that, but I'm just, amazed at how Patrick Stewart still managed to deliver a good performance in Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness, even though it was for a, quick cameo. But I want to talk about another thing about this movie that I've mentioned in my non-spoiler segment of this review, and it is this. It definitely expanded on Stephen Strange as a character in the MCU, especially when they talked about his sister Donna, when Stephen Strange from our universe, 616, was conversing with the other Doctor Strange. His sister fell into the ice, and Stephen was, unable to retrieve her from that ice. And hearing about that moment gave me Jack Frost from the Guardians vibes. An animation where Jack Frost shoots ice, and they team up with Santa Claus to save Christmas or something. I actually don't remember the movie that I'm referring to, but I know this basic, origin story for Jack Frost. So, when Jack Frost falls in the ice and his sister loses him, I think that's one of the things I remember about a character like Jack Frost in Doctor Strange. There's always this origin story where a sibling dies, and it's at the fault of, or it's no one's fault, but it's on the watch of one character. So Stephen had to watch his sister fall into that ice, and it kind of explains why Stephen Strange wants to become a surgeon and why he wants to do good, even though it's similar to how Tony Stark's ego doesn't always correlate with his intentions to do good to society. So we see Stephen Strange as an egotistic rich guy, surgeon. He thinks that he is the one who should be the one to save others from their demises. And by the way, this is where I've really enjoyed, surprisingly, America Chavez. Because, when Strange and Chavez reminisced their past in memory lane, this movie managed to convey to us where Chavez was truly coming from and who she's about and her identity and her main struggles, and I believe that's what storytelling should do at the bare minimum. But he also had managed she also had managed to uplift Doctor Strange as a character in MCU, because we've seen Doctor Strange, not willing to accept help, or he didn't have that much of a sense of humility until America Chavez fell into his universe. So I think that added, or rather re-emphasized, some of the touching elements in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And by the way, we can't forget about Christine. I believe the way they've set up Christine and Stephen Strange's relationships. The reason why I'm saying relationships in a plural sense is because there is more than one Christine variant. So the fact that they managed to set up, pretty much set up the dynamic between Stephen Strange and Christine in this Doctor Strange sequel. And you could see that Stephen Strange had chemistry with the other Christine variant in the same universe as the Illuminati. And the fact that they still made her relevant to the plot. And of course, do that cliche, hero has a love interest, they work together, and they soon develop some chemistry. That kind of formula they use for every type of movie, if that makes sense. But regardless, I think she still contributed, and the way she advised him to utilize the spirits that had condemned Stephen Strange for moonwalking. And by the way, let's talk about moonwalking before I wrap this up. I think moonwalking or dreamwalking. Damn, I really need to remember the terminology here. I think dreamwalking. Yeah, dreamwalking. So, I think it's a clever concept because, I believe that the multiverse is something that needs to have something to, I think it's something that needs to be thought of a bit more when you do any sort of movie in the multiverse. And I think that's what Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness did. It told us how Stephen Strange is able to navigate from one universe to the next. And it gave us some pretty cool visuals, especially when Stephen Strange summoned up the spirits and, was able to save America Chavez from the Scarlet Witch. So, that was a good, connective of the multiversal concept in this movie. Now, these are my thoughts of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. But what are your opinions on the Doctor Strange sequel? Do you think it managed to stick the landing? I can speak for myself when I say that this isn't my number one Marvel film, and I believe, I think Spider-Man No Way Home was more of a multiversal film than Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness was, and I talked about briefly Everything Everywhere All at Once. That is a multiversal movie that, I believe Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness has no chance of beating. Please let me know in the comment section below your thoughts and valuable insights.
Listen, I cannot understand you! This is crazy! You're a fool! I can't cope with this stupid bitchy! Understand?
Christian Bale is an actor who played the most iconic character roles in film history. He played Batman in Batman Begins 2005, 5 years after a psychological black comedy thriller, American Psycho. A movie that essentially portrays a New York City investment banker who's apparently a serial killer that preys on women and homeless people. Now, before I get started with this review, I would just like to say that this American Psycho film essentially sticks a middle finger to the traditional 3-act structure of any movie in general. So, what I mean by that is that usually films would have a concise resolution in its possession, whether it is a positive or a negative one, at the end of the third act, since that would mean that the movie is done, or the viewer wouldn't have to keep speculating for answers, right? This isn't the case with American Psycho, and I'm sure the same is for other movies in cinema, but I am reviewing American Psycho specifically. That means that some of the elements of this review will be theorized when it comes to the ending, and the reason that I'm even saying all of this is because that might be one of the few times that my commentary of the content will be affected by said theorized elements, and not by certainty. That makes sense? Okay, good. The point is, there is a possibility that I could be overpraising or misjudging this movie due to potential misunderstandings of the ending of American Psycho. I'm gonna stop boring you with my overextended thought process and just jump straight to the things I liked about this movie, and then the things I didn't like. If there's any criticism to be had about this movie at all. So, the first thing I liked was Willem Dafoe's brilliant portrayal of Donald Kimball. Willem Dafoe plays the private investigator Donald Kimball, who interviews Patrick Bateman about his involvement in the disappearance of Paul Allen. So, basically, just for additional context, Paul Allen tries to exhibit his precedence, and that really pisses Bateman off, and so Patrick Bateman supposedly kills Paul Allen with an axe. Now, Willem Dafoe does an unsurpassable job at portraying the good yet effective investigator who just analyzes the facts surrounding a case, like any sound detective should. Granted, Donald Kimball, again played by Willem Dafoe, had limited screen time, and so he was basically a side character. But the few times Willem Dafoe's character Donald Kimball was present on screen, it was intriguing from his first to last scene of the movie. And Willem Dafoe's performance was phenomenal all the way through, consistently. And like when he tells Bateman that he isn't under suspicion for Allen's disappearance, was also pretty good. Like, it's no wonder that Willem Dafoe is the first casting choice here, even if he doesn't play a nonchalant character like Donald Kimball, because obviously he went on to play the psychopathic Green Goblin in Spider-Man, and Spider-Man No Way Home. Another thing that I really appreciated about American Psycho was the ambiguity at the end of whether or not Bateman has committed mass murder, or if these murders were a figment of his imagination. Because in my mind, Bateman may as well have killed Paul Allen, because he has enormous wealth in his possession. Society just gave him a pass and let him walk free. It's also funny that Wall Street was responsible for the collapse of moral values in the 1990s, which continues on until this very day, in my opinion. And I mean, it is without a doubt, such thought-provoking prospects is what makes American Psycho a solid movie. Because if Bateman's crimes aren't brought to light, and if Bateman isn't convicted for murder, then it really invokes a scary realization to the viewer's consciousness. This realization would then spark the daunting question: does this Bateman figure live among our society? Such scary philosophies align with the horror genre, the psychological horror genre, which American Psycho is clearly trying to aim for. And let me just tell you, when a film can be successful at portraying their own genre, such as American Psycho's psychological horror genre, there is a 9 out of 13 chance that it is an absolute masterpiece of a film. Period. But I do want to bring up this question. Do I think American Psycho is a masterpiece? Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. I enjoyed American Psycho. The narcissistic attributes of Wall Street life, Bateman, Craig McDermott, and Paul Allen are utterly fascinating, accurate psychopathic portrayals, and its horrific and disturbing elements are to be enjoyed as well. All of that is to be enjoyed, but there are also things I think this movie could have benefited more from, and that is a 2-hour runtime instead of just a 1-hour one. This extra runtime could have given us a bit of clarification about the homeless man and other members of the public that have been killed or not killed by Patrick Bateman. So far, given our limited comprehension, we were only given a sense of Paul Allen's whereabouts, and while Paul Allen was the only victim being investigated, there were a number of other victims as well that I think could have been developed a tad more. Because it could have increased the impact of their death because of how much they have been or could have been developed. And I'm still contemplating whether to give this movie a benefit of the doubt in that regard, if there was actually a hidden message. Could it have been because Paul Allen was rich and his family, whoever could afford a private investigator? Meaning socio-economic standing played a role in this? Who knows? Now, did these limitations of American Psycho take away the things that I immensely enjoyed about American Psycho? Not really. Although I do have to make the assertion that this isn't a movie I would or one would rewatch, but if you would give me like 3 to 4 months, maybe 5, I'll probably watch it again. The fact that this movie was also produced in a golden age of filmmaking with movies like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, although that was later on, Gladiator, X-Men, truly speaks about the authenticity of American Psycho. And I think that overall, it definitely banked its place in the cruise ship of masterpieces. We begin to approach the post-sentencing hearing. What is the post-sentencing hearing? Well, I'm glad you asked. In the first half of the Cinema Courtroom podcast, we review one of the films I've selected, or in this case, 2, old and new, big and small, underrated and overrated, the broken and the damned, black, white, brown, orange, and blue. Then, in the second half of the recording, I assemble all of the leftover topics that pertain to the film industry in general and integrate it into one post-sentencing hearing list. Think of it as a after party that is long overdue, where you are invited, or in judiciary terms, an invitation to a retrial in order to rectify an unjust hearing. Because sometimes, like the organic sapien that I am, I find that I've been too critically generous or harsh about a movie. So most of the time, my opinions do change after a rewatch or two, which means I'm compelled to review it again in a post-sentencing hearing. If you listen this far into the podcast, then I salute you for sticking around to the second half of the Cinema Courtroom show. If you enjoy what you're hearing, what I have to say, if you haven't done so already, I would very much appreciate it if you give this podcast a reshare and like this episode by clicking the thumbs up or heart icon on whatever platform that you're listening on. Spotify, SoundCloud, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel. This way, you will be supporting the Cinema Courtroom as well as its future episodes, installments, and assets. That being said, I salute you in advance for your generous engagement and support, and I hope you continue to join us in the ride to success. In this hearing, we will be talking about the following: China's impact on the cinema industry, and the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial, what it entails, and the impact of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial on the movie-going experience. But first, before we talk about those things that are without a doubt very intriguing to talk about, especially the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard one, can you guess what day it is? It is a special day named after the planet Mars, an unlucky day, according to the Greeks, dedicated to the god of freaking war, the second or third day of the week, and it's Tuesday! Do you know what this also means? It's Tuesday Movie Trivia. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome to Tuesday Movie Trivia. Every time that an episode of the Cinema Courtroom podcast launches on a Tuesday, I host trivia on that specific day. The nice thing about our trivia segment of the Tuesday podcast is that you can play at any time, with the exception of special editions where you'd have until Tuesday to answer, and anywhere at any place. Bring your cat, dog, pigeons, put this podcast on the biggest speaker you can find, grab a snack and drink, a piece of paper, and find out how much intelligence you have in your valuable possession about movies. So basically, I'll be asking you a movie related question, and then in our standard edition of Tuesday Movie Trivia, the answer will be revealed after a 10-second timer. In today's movie trivia, I'll be asking this: for what movie did Tom Hanks score his first Academy Award nomination? The answer is Big. Were you able to get that answer right? Or did it turn out to be wrong? Whatever it is, let me know in the comment section below. Okay guys, let's do one more. In The Matrix, does Neo take the blue or red pill? The answer is red. Sure, lecturers love talking about the blue and red pill a lot. So here you go. Thank you for participating in Tuesday Movie Trivia. Share this podcast with your friends and see how they might respond to these trivia questions, or if they're absolute dumbasses. I hope you participate again, and see you next Tuesday to once again be destroyed by these movie questions.
Hello there.
The dragon is nothing short of a Chinese symbol, and as per popular belief, people born in the year of the dragon are believed to possess latent confidence and power. And do you know what else these Chinese dragon symbols illustrate? Wealth. Wealth that is the amount of purple and Barney the dinosaur's skin, which, to say the least, is a lot of astronomical purple. And the only reason that I just made that assertion was because I wanted an excuse to name drop Barney for some weird ass reason. But the point that I want to illustrate is pure and simple. China is rich. The cinema industry knows it. Hollywood knows it. Your cat, dog, and pigeons know it. Basically everyone is aware of the fact that China is rich. We know for a fact that there is an impact of China on the cinema industry for sure. But the thing I want to talk about is how much is China impacting cinema. Is China impacting cinema to a large degree or a lesser degree? Now, you might be contemplating, Makram, the answer to your question is obvious. And I mean, sure, you might have a non-vague idea of what conclusions that I'm going to draw about the subject, partially because of how I'm approaching it by the sound of my demeanor or voice, because the way I say, China is rich, China is greedy, China are a bunch of suck-it-up know-it-alls. But look, I think it's still important to talk about from scratch, especially in light of what had happened recently with the new Fantastic Beasts film in the Harry Potter franchise, The Secrets of Dumbledore. and its censorship of dialogue, which had alluded to Dumbledore and Grindelwald's gay relationship. That's the secret of Dumbledore, Potterheads. Newsflash, Dumbledore is out of the closet, and so the title just wanted to refer to that. Just kidding. Unless I am accidentally right about this one. In which case, don't give me credit. It's all good, because I have like a box of wonderful ideas stored up somewhere that I can use if I wanted to get clout on Twitter or something. But anyway, the lines they censored from the Fantastic Beasts film were, "Because I was in love with you," and "The summer Gerald and I fell in love," which really isn't that much of a big edit, yet it still had to be edited down to begin with. And fortunately, the film is still able to be intact, because 6 seconds out of a 142-minute runtime ain't a bad deal. Now, if these censored 6 seconds actually did affect the movie, which it shouldn't, then that is where I think we should have a problem with it, unless you hold the perception that we shouldn't be having a problem with it. This is why, here in this podcast especially, talking about China's level of impact on the cinema industry as a whole is vital to our discussion. Let's go out on a limb and say that China didn't impact the cinema industry that much. No one would be making a big deal out of this. Heck, this wouldn't have even been a topic to converse about on my show if it didn't have at least some impact to be noticeable, right? But if China does impact the cinema industry by a lot, then yeah, naturally people's perceptions would lean toward the sentiment that we should be making a big deal about China's censorship on the film industry, since it could have a positive or negative impact on the film industry. Or perhaps we shouldn't or should. What do you guys think? And you might not know just yet. This is why I want to once again tackle what might sound like an obvious question, but really isn't. In order to get an answer to the question of China's impact on the cinema industry, as I have brought up before, it is crucial for us to dive into the following elements. Cultural delicacy. How sensitive must a film be to Chinese culture in order for the studio to be allowed to distribute it in Chinese theaters? History. What has already happened with China? What has already occurred with certain movies in the past that conditioned its release in Chinese theaters, or was not allowed to be released altogether? And China pleaser syndrome. What has a studio done, especially in this COVID-19 pandemic, to be on China's good side? Let's begin with cultural delicacy. Ghostbusters 2016, as bad as a movie as it was in my opinion, was not allowed to be distributed in China for the very sole purpose that it had what the title of the movie suggests. Ghosts. The Chinese government, along with its censorship guidelines, prohibit any movies that endorse cults or superstitions. It is blatantly, according to Chinese censorship guidelines, disrespecting their culture. 3,500 years of written Chinese history is flushed down the toilet because of a fictional premise about the supernatural ghosts of a beloved franchise, Ghostbusters. Back to the Future in 1985 apparently made a disrespectful portrayal of history because of its time-traveling aspects. So, just to reiterate again, these are cultural elements that made movies lose a 48.2% share of the China box office. So I mean, clearly, for as long as the Chinese government wants to preserve their culture, a movie from Hollywood or any other foreign studio is going to have to somehow compensate for the percentage that we squandered elsewhere. And there ain't no place like China to release a movie. So it's really, really, really tough. You either come up with a screenplay that doesn't disrespect the culture and however the censorship guidelines want it to be, which ironically disrespects the filmmaker's vision. But those are censorship guidelines for you. Because I think it's important to be reminded that the ghosts from Ghostbusters might not be offensive in the slightest to you and me. In fact, let's be real. you'd probably cosplay as one of them or one of the other Ghostbusters in a pop culture convention. But to Chinese culture, however, it's the last thing you want to associate your product with, especially if you're planning on consolidating the box office, and especially if your goal is to reach the $1 billion mark, which very few films have been able to achieve, with the exception of Titanic, Finding Dory, No Way Home, Avengers Endgame, Captain Marvel, apparently, The Dark Knight Rises, Transformers Age of Extinction, Transformers Dark of the Moon, The Force Awakens, Jurassic World, Lord of the Rings The Return of the King, Deathly Hallows Part 2. The list can go on, okay? And I'd assume the contributing factor to that box office success was because it was able to be distributed in Chinese theatrical chains. Forget how good or mediocre these movies were. But what if China separated their culture from their censorship guidelines? That might actually alter the tide. I want to list the UAE as an example, because that's where I'm living at this present time. The MCU was allowed to distribute the Eternals in the UAE cinema chains, censoring one or two scenes that had a queer character in it. And on top of that, Eternals is resolved around mythological gods and a group of immortal beings that were present in humanity since the dawn of time. You'd figure that the UAE censorship guidelines would have seen this and decided, nope, this is disrespectful to the prophets that lived in our history, let's not release it. And the reality is, it is within the UAE's right, as well as China's right, for that matter, to bar a movie from entering their theatrical market for whatever reason that they deem fit, even if we don't like it or even if we don't agree with it. But yet they've allowed the Eternals to be released, even if it might not culturally align with some of their cultural values, for as long as it doesn't cross a line. Well, maybe Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia might have thought that the Eternals' mere portrayals of gods crossed a substantial line, and that's on them to stop the movie from being released in their countries. The main reason being, of course, the depiction of a same-sex relationship. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which I've talked about in length in this episode of the Cinema Courtroom, also portrays America Chavez and her two moms, and they just allowed the movie to be released, which I'm grateful that they've hadn't cut, because it was actually essential to America Chavez's story arc. I talk more about that in the Doctor Strange review, which you've probably already listened to. But the Eternal Phastos has a child and a husband in the movie. But wouldn't the UAE have had enough incentive to go that same approach like the 3 other countries that I mentioned did? Not including China. It turns out the UAE is letting it slide. And for good reason. Because big studios attract a large crowd of audiences. And since, unlike China, the theatrical industry understands that Marvel Studios has popular movie choices on their plate, and they want their citizens to go and be entertained. Because entertainment does make up a huge percentage of the economy. Okay? But China, on the other hand, is unhinged. They do have zero tolerance for whatever they might perceive to be disrespectful to their cultural delicacy, regardless of how much popularity it holds. And once again, that's on them, and what they believe and what the Chinese culture is. But you can obviously see that the impact from culture is there. Now, what about history? What has taken place already with China and actors and movies? Well, there are multiple actors that upset China. Brad Pitt being one of them. He starred in this film 7 Years in Tibet. Yikes. Now I see how that may upset China. But anyway, it portrayed the occupation of Tibet by the Chinese military, which wasn't in the Chinese government's liking. The film itself, along with Brad Pitt, and the rest of the crew, was barred from stepping foot in China or distributing their film in China. And another thing who got, or another person who received shit for something that is related to the Tibetan occupation, Harrison Ford, the man who played the character who made the Quetzal run in less than 12 parsecs and Solo, was banned from the country for his views regarding China's breach of human rights. Speaking of Star Wars characters, back when Star Wars The Force Awakens had launched their marketing campaign, Finn, a black character in the movie, was not allowed to be in the poster for China. It was obviously a race issue, and by the looks of it, before we knew about Rey even, Finn was promoted to be this ex-stormtrooper becoming a Jedi character. Obviously, knowing what we know now, that was a misdirect from China's marketing campaigns. It still does not alter the fact that Finn was an important character in The Force Awakens. And well, with his color of skin, China wanted it to be censored and changed. Now, how about other movies that were forced to change for China? Doctor Strange, for one, was banned because of the Ancient One character who originated from Tibet, which again, China does not recognize as an independent state. And you know, it's really interesting how there are political events that still remain a touchy subject for China and their film industries. Movies are a diverse art form, so it is indeed, without a shred of doubt, inevitable that there are always going to be controversial political themes in those movies. Which also means that China is banning more than half of foreign films from reaching their theaters. Fast and Furious 9 could have potentially been one of them. John Cena was forced to make a formal apology, in Chinese, might I add, to China for calling Taiwan a country. He said the following, which I will gladly translate in English, because I don't want to attempt to read Chinese and end up butchering it, because I know nothing. But anyway, I love and respect China and Chinese people. I'm very, very sorry for my mistake. You know, I can just imagine, just by reading this, that the folks and the people in Universal Pictures going up to the Invisible Man's living room and saying, "Go in there and apologize to the Chinese people right now. This isn't a game of WWE where you can win. So next time, say that Taiwan is a figment of everyone's imagination." Okay? In all seriousness, I am of the opinion that the Fast and Furious franchise has evolved from illegal DVD distribution to a trip to space. To say the least, it has become bland and ridiculous. Street-level concepts in the storyline have evolved to become storylines with ridiculous cosmic proportions. But you may then be asking, how are they still making so many figures at the box office? It's because of China. And considering that this was in the middle of the pandemic, I could easily imagine that Universal Studios wanted to make things right again. Because you need the old box office that you can get. Sure, perhaps pre-COVID, Universal Pictures could have sat that one out, maybe? But in the pandemic? No. You need China. Nay, the entire theatrical industry needs a slice of China's economic wealth pie in a world where not many people went to the cinema because they've had to self-quarantine. It was deemed unsafe in a majority of locations to go to a crowded theater and getting exposed to a COVID-19 variant. It's self-explanatory to say that China did whatever it took to get China's release, even if it means proclaiming Taiwan is not a country. Taiwan is not a country. Taiwan is not a Look, some users I presume to be Chinese government loyalists were discontent with John Cena's scripted apology. And one might even write that it was, it's the Western political correctness. He wants Chinese people to forgive him, but he also doesn't want to offend idiot Taiwan and the West. And you may be wondering, why does this person's opinion carry so much importance? Well, it indicates one important thing for us. China is catching on, or they've had a history of catching on, and continuing to catch on, because they know that Hollywood studios wanted to please them, and still, for a matter of fact, do. Suffice to say that the assertion that they are falling for their PR apologies isn't really far off. Now, this leads to my final point, China pleaser syndrome. By the way, don't muddle this up with Stockholm syndrome, although you can if you want to, if you were to interpret it as economic Stockholm syndrome, which might actually be a stretch to say the least. Anyway, Marvel Studios filmed an entire movie dedicated to China, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. They've brought in people to consult with in order to, ensure that they are following precise censorship guidelines, which means that they ended up ditching Shang-Chi's original story arc in the comics, where he was seeking refuge in the United States for a quote-quote better life. Obviously, China would have banned the movie on the spot if they stayed accurate to the comics in that regard. So, what was their clever solution to combat this? Marvel Studios decided to do this storyline in reverse. Shang-Chi returns to China to reunite with his Chinese father, the Mandarin, who had the Ten Rings in his possession, and also lurked in the shadows in Iron Man 3, making him an important character to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, how cool is that? A Chinese character was prominent in a major character's own movie, Iron Man 3. And for what it was worth, Marvel had managed to create an epic kung fu movie out of Shang-Chi, with a very solid and established plotline, in my opinion, that the MCU had a lot to build up to, including Iron Man 3. Now, let me reiterate again. Marvel did this to please China, and I mean, who would blame them, right? It turns out Marvel Studios and Disney unfortunately made this colossal effort in vain, as Simu Liu allegedly made problematic statements that have offended China. Seriously, what is it with offending China these days? I feel like, this is my opinion, I feel like China needs to publish a how to release a movie in a theatrical industry manual. It can be all written in Chinese if you so wish, nothing that Google Translate can't fix, so that screenplay writers and studios like Disney and Warner Brothers can have the manual next to them right here. And it's either that or Hollywood is likely to maximize their presence in other regions, probably even the Middle East. Maybe focus more on Dubai's theatrical economy, since it does have a rich entertainment economy, and it has become relatively flexible whenever it comes to cultural elements, as again we've seen with Eternals and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But then again, it's China that has the biggest box office profitability margin, and therefore it is China that is prioritized when distributing movies there. Given all of that, cultural delicacy, history, and China pleaser syndrome, what do you think about China's impact on the theatrical industry as a whole? Is the impact even a big deal? Should movies edit their scripts to align with Chinese, regulations? Do you think they're ridiculous? Or do you think, they have the right to preserve their cultures with the movies that are getting released from Hollywood? Should they perhaps seek another compromise? Whatever it is, let me know your valuable insights in the comment section below, because I'll be very interested to know what you think about everything that's going on with the China theatrical industry and the censorship guidelines. That being said, Taiwan's not a country. Doing that in case China decides to censor my podcast. So yeah.
Heard, you still haven't donated the $7 million divorce settlement to charity. Isn't that right?
Incorrect. I pledged the entirety of the settlement, $7 million to charity, and I intend to fulfill those obligations.
All right, let's get this shit over with.
My dog stepped on a bee. bee, and bee. My dog stepped on a bee, and bee, and bee.
If you thought my discussion about China was long, I would suggest that you pause this podcast right now. Grab a snack, take delight in a boiled pigeon, hit the like button if you haven't done so already, whether you're watching on Spotify, YouTube, or SoundCloud, and join me as I do a flashback on the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard verdict, the amount of evidence and jury work that were a contributing factor to its verdict, alongside its impact on the movie-going experience, will be discussed in full length in this segment of the Cinema Courtroom. Now, here in the Cinema Courtroom, we make verdicts on what movies are good or flat out terrible. But sometimes we do tend to get too caught up on fictional movies and fictional people, fictional places, and, perhaps out of habit, we tend to focus less on the real non-fiction courtroom drama that is taking place, which has the impact of replacing or getting rid of a character from beloved movie franchises, like Johnny Depp from the Pirates of the Caribbean, for instance, or Amber Heard from Aquaman 2, or Aquaman The Lost Kingdom. This courtroom drama of interest that, again, I'm going to cover in length on the segment of the Cinema Courtroom show is, as you know, the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the past months had been nothing short of real courtroom drama, and Johnny Depp got to take home a goodie bag for his victory for his defamation lawsuit against Amber Heard with $10 million, while Amber Heard, on the other hand, got to take $2 million as she suffered a dense ass whooping. That ass whooping of hers was so dense, you would almost mistake it as a child stealing candy from the store and getting spanked for it in public. So, before I establish the trial's impact on the movie-going experience, I want to break down how the jury was even in favor of Johnny Depp to begin with, and not Amber Heard. Because remember, the jury's, verdict gave Warner Brothers a full legal perception of Amber Heard, which, I will discuss later how it's going to affect the decision to remove or recast her from Aquaman. Full disclosure, by the way, Amber Heard, or should I say Amber Turd, was not credible at all when it came to her arguments when she took the stand, and domestic violence accusations that Amber has made. The jury has now confirmed these accusations as defamatory and false, completely fabricated, no shred of credibility. And she put up quite the performance when she was examined in the courtroom. Let's put it that way. And my oh my, would the box office of Aquaman 2 sing like Miley Cyrus on Skunks if they put that substantial energy that she did to craft her acting performance in the courtroom to improve her acting on Aquaman. My disliking of Amber Heard aside, this breakdown will be trying to tackle this courtroom drama in an objective and structured way, which means while my personal opinions might cloud some of that structure, because it would be impossible to fully dodge them, it will be composed in a way that will still tackle the other side of the issue, which is Amber Heard's side. Even though we must keep in mind that she lost, and it is very unlikely that she will be able to afford an appeal. Don't forget, that $2 million that she had managed to win because, some lawyer defamed her or whatever, ain't going to consolidate appeal expenses if she chooses to make an appeal. Especially when she has to pay her attorneys their contracted fees, as well as a share of any, money that is won from the case, and hopefully buy more convincing makeup the next time that she wants to fabricate bruises on her very, very ugly and hideous face. Ugly and hideous are the same word. I don't know why I used them in the same sentence, but whatever. I digress to say that we are not a legal podcast. We are not Emily D. Baker. We are not the legal eagle. While I am fascinated with law, in fact, there is a TV series I enjoy watching under the title of Better Call Saul. I would seriously recommend that you check it out. But on the other hand, I'm more fascinated and invested with, covering movies rather than matters pertaining to law at this present time. So, yeah, I just had to get that context out of the way in case you're watching my podcast for the first time. In which case, cheers. I'm happy to have you running up that hill to success, as Kate Bush would say. And have you guys noticed that this podcast is being released at a fair time distance from when this trial had, from this trial's, conclusion? That's mainly because I wanted to analyze the facts and then come up with a, finalized insight on how, on the Amber Heard trial, and I just wanted to take my time when talking about a subject matter like this one. Without further ado, there are components of the subject matter that we had to have taken into account before this trial reached its conclusion on June 1st, 2022. One of the components is what the jury would be looking for from Amber Heard and her legal team, which is the following. Amber Heard's claims about Johnny Depp that pertain to SX violence, an incident in the plane, the concealment of Amber's bruises, her taunting Johnny Depp, Kate Moss, who is rumored by Amber Heard to have been pushed by Johnny Depp down the stairs and has testified, no, Johnny Depp never pushed her. Her words. Amber Heard's flat-out admission of domestic violence as well as NDAs being breached. And the second component that we must also take into account is the donation that Amber Heard has pledged, not yet having fulfilled the obligation of, that she would donate money from her divorce proceeds from the termination of marriage settlement with Johnny Depp, and whether or not she was even going to make the donation to begin with. I also want to converse about what she had admitted in court, as well as talk about Camille and how she had performed her cross-examination of Amber Heard. I want to talk about all of these things. However, I'm only going to be talking about a few of these components for now, but I've just highlighted, everything that went on from what the jury would be looking for from Amber Heard. In addition to that, alongside the two components that I want to discuss, there's also a third component of this breakdown, which will be the jury's expectation from Johnny Depp, because after all, it was Depp who had filed the lawsuit. And I'm going to say straight off the bat, the jury was not looking for drug confessions or alcoholism with Johnny Depp. They weren't interested, as of why Amber Heard's own witnesses and lawyers, such as Mr. Rottenborn, who I believe to be as rotten as an expired melon, hence the surname Rottenborn, were adamant in bringing it up in their arguments. I do not know. And we now know that this overestimation of Johnny Depp's drug use being a proper argument cost them their victory. And let's also not neglect the fact that Johnny Depp has confessed multiple times to partaking in these substances. So, drug use was not relevant to this trial. Perhaps in another trial, but not this one. I'll repeat again, drug use was not relevant. So, without further ado, let us get this show on the road.
He starts, what it feels like patting me down or saying he's patting me down. I can't recall, but he ripped my dress, the strap top part of my dress. I had just dyed this thing myself pink, and it's just one of those things. I was like, that's I just finished that dress, and he's like grabbing he rips my, and then he proceeds to do a cavity search. He said he was looking for his drugs, his cocaine, his coke. I was wondering how somebody who didn't do cocaine and was against it, that was in and of itself causing problems in our relationship.
The audio segment that I just played to you featured a testimonial account from Amber Heard that stated the following premise. She is presumably the victim of sex violence by Johnny Depp. I'm going to refrain from saying the exact terminology to avoid getting a monetization strike from, YouTube and such. Now, the jury would typically think, how come prior to this trial that this particular violence hasn't been discussed? Or disclosed, for that matter. Amber Heard is obligated to testify under oath the truth, the entirety of the truth, and nothing but the truth. Okay? That being stated, I find it fascinating how her, previous under oath statements contradict there being a SX assault. So if her SX claims, SX violence claims, were indeed true beyond a reasonable doubt, then that still means that she's going to face a perjury. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, she's about to face one very soon in the near future. And Lewis from Newsweek summarizes the situation best, and I quote, "If it's true that there was SX violence, then her prior under oath statements were simply not true. So, what truth is Amber telling here? I'm genuinely intrigued to know, because unless some law expert tells me the truth in her testified statements, I am forced to surmise that Amber Heard is a liar, and that Amber Heard lied about her allegations made towards Johnny Depp. I want to believe her. If she is indeed the victim, it is absolutely a good thing if you believe her. But right now, it is absolutely clinical to believe her. You would have to be out of your damn mind to believe that her testimonial account of Johnny assaulting her has any shred of credibility. Okay, so we discussed in length what the Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp trial entailed. Granted, again, I didn't cover everything that I've highlighted in the beginning. But, those are the things I want, to cover in perhaps another podcast. But how about its impact on the movie-going experience? There have been, reports which stated that Amber Heard has been cut from one of DC's next movies in the release docket, Aquaman and The Lost Kingdom, as Amber Heard is no longer playing her character role as Mera predominantly. So we're, discussing a major character being diced from a lucrative IP and blockbuster series. In case you're unfamiliar with the story of Aquaman, Mera, previously played by Amber Heard, is the love interest of Arthur Curry in the comics and live action films. And in case you're unaware, Arthur Curry is the Aquaman. I mean, no shit, right? I may as well mention that Clark Kent is Superman, or that Bruce Wayne is Batman. Now, funny enough, there have been spoiler bombs dispersed in the courtroom throughout this Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial, one of which is that, spoiler alert, Amber Heard's character has given birth to a child. And so did Amber Heard, apparently. Whatever. Amber Heard being cut from the film might also, impact the direction of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom if they readjust the script to accommodate the removal of Amber Heard's portrayal of Mera in the sequel. How might that Johnny Depp versus Amber trial, which led to Amber Heard's removal from the sequel, affect the movie-going experience? This will affect the movie-going experience of the audience, because they could see a scene that might feature, for example, Mera dying from childbirth at the start of the sequel in an effort to significantly reduce her screen time. Because you can't give a character who is in the jaws of death some screen time, right? Right? She dead, bro. Some film intellectual who might go by the name... Give me a name. Let's call him Jeremy Nipple. Now, Jeremy Nipple is going to watch the Warner Brothers and DC logo play in, and then it's going to transition from the logo to Mera, who had only been depicted in Aquaman and the Justice League. Barely an established character, dying from childbirth in the first act of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. What conclusion do you think Mr. Nipple is going to draw, other than that he ate one bucket of hormone-infested chicken too many and needs to turn his life around? Jeremy is going to reach the conclusion that there have been some controversial nuggets behind the scenes, which is again the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial, and then the outcome of it, which had led to alterations in the screenplay. Or maybe, Jeremy Christopher Nipples might give Warner Brothers the benefit of the doubt and say to himself, you know what, maybe I should pick up a dumbbell. Just kidding. Maybe it is convenient for the story to let a character die all of a sudden, and maybe it is all happening for a perfectly justified and plausible reason. And I mean, hey, James Wan produced the first Aquaman movie, and he did a fantastic job making it despite the negative reception of the theatrical Justice League cut. Needless to say, the assertion that James Wan could pull off that same success again under great adversity isn't far-fetched, despite, the inconveniences that this Depp and Heard trial has wrought on the making of this film. Jeremy Nipple, alongside other die-hard fans of the DC Universe and the general audience, would be rest assured that Mera's absence from the movie won't distract their experience, and that it is going to be executed very well, providing a good movie-going experience. Let's be real. There are people in the general audience who aren't as invested in the making of this movie and, the Hollywood industry, like some of you listening to this podcast might be. They're just, regular people who have a life and don't give a fuck. So, at some point or another, they're just going to sit down and watch a movie about Aquaman and not care about why X character is absent from the story, for as long as the story justifies it. And good on them. In a way, I wish that I was one of those people, but I'm not, so there's that. But allow me to entertain another possibility of how the movie-going experience would be affected for any audience. How about the option to recast Mera with another actress? I mean, after all, we've indeed watched characters get recast countless times. Edward Norton being replaced by Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk in The Avengers, the actor of War Machine getting replaced with Don Cheadle in Iron Man 2, although that's definitely not going to happen with Black Panther, played by Chadwick Boseman in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. May he rest in peace. And this also happened with Grindelwald in the Fantastic Beasts films, who was previously played by Johnny Depp, and now he is played by Mads Mikkelsen in Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore. At this present time, I think that Mads Mikkelsen did an exceptional job as Grindelwald and had a solid chemistry with Jude Law's Dumbledore on screen, who the movie was about. But, however, I also think that it was nowhere near as brilliant in caliber as Johnny Depp's take on Grindelwald, and it's a big shame that he lost that role. Amber Heard is, losing her role, so it's all fair game now, I suppose. But anyway, my opinions and perceptions about Johnny Depp being replaced as Grindelwald, as I just mentioned now, is an example of how my own movie-going experience is affected by when any character is recast in general. It leaves me and other people in the audience contemplating, maybe that other character that played this specific character in X movie did a better job than the new actor. In Aquaman, Amber Heard is no different when it comes to audience perception. This Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp trial, with all of its numerous established components, has culminated to a verdict that resulted in Amber's reputation in the movie industry being tarnished. And as such, there have been plenty of incentive for Warner Brothers to recast her with another actress to play Mera. Some people are suggesting Emilia Clarke. Now, Emilia Clarke plays the Mother of Dragons and the would-be Queen of the Iron Throne, Daenerys in Game of Thrones. The reason why Emilia Clarke has been campaigned for a role in Aquaman 2 is because it's solely because of the fact that she had a relationship with Jason Momoa's character in season 1 of Game of Thrones. And I mean, she might look perfect for the role. And it would definitely appeal to the demographic that loves Game of Thrones and drive them to buy tickets just to see Jason Momoa and Emilia Clarke on the big screen once again together as lovers. This is what this segment of the podcast, Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp trial, has culminated to. Jason Momoa and Emilia Clarke finally having that long-awaited reunion, except it's going to be in a DC movie. Ain't that a dream? So anyway, I've talked about the Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp trial and its impact on the movie-going experience. What do you guys think of how your own movie-going experience is going to be affected with the absence of Amber Heard from Aquaman? And by the way, how would your experience be impacted by watching Grindelwald being played by another actor in the Fantastic Beasts franchise? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. We have now reached the end of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Cinema Courtroom show where we critiqued movies. I had a lot of fun doing this podcast, so make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the third installment of the Cinema Courtroom show. And I hope to see you guys again in the next episode, where we're going to talk about yet again another movie. As of what movie it's going to be, well, I'm going to tell you. It's going to be Everything Everywhere All at Once. Keep your eyes out on when the next episode will launch on the YouTube, SoundCloud, and Spotify platform this Friday, and find out my thoughts on Everything Everywhere All at Once. So once again, the next episode of the Cinema Courtroom show will be coming this week on Friday. So please set your notifications, and you're going to be one of the first people notified on when that's going to drop. Especially considering it's going to be Everything Everywhere All at Once. Friday, episode 4 of the Cinema Courtroom. I will see you there. And thank you once again for listening till the end. I am your galactic judge, Macro Mark, and I hope you have a spectacular, spectacular day.
Hello there.
Court is now dismissed.